This is going to be my Archon Shard guide. Because Archon Shards are very new, if any of it is potentially misleading or incorrect, I will try to let you know. And in addition to that, if you do find anything that's incorrect, make sure you scream at me very angrily in the comments. So we're going to go through each of these new Archon Shards, and I'm going to explain to you what I know about them, so that you can have a better understanding of what to put on your build so that you don't fuck anything up and potentially waste a lot of bile. We did get some bile buffs, but it's still very costly to combine and destroy these things or what have you, because it costs a new currency which you need 50 of to combine them. Now, I unfortunately don't know if you can unfuse an Archon Shard. I literally do not know. So right off the bat, that's like one of the things I don't know. But we're going to be going through each of the shards. Now, we're going to start from right and go to the left, but I want to bring your attention to this first one here. Again, 10% energy or ability damage on enemies affected by electricity status. The status, it's not from your frame. It could be from your weapon, it could be from an aura, it could be from your pet, anything that you have that's applying a status damage. Now, there's one of these for the purple one here. We have the electricity, and then we have the radiation down at the bottom there, and you could also see it here is a 15% radiation status, and then we also have one for corrosive status effect. Now, I'm going to addressing all of these here, so we will skip over them when we get to them, but essentially, to my understanding, these work like a Bane. While it's not double dipping your damage, it's a final damage multiplier. So the red Archon Shard here, you see ability strength. So the benefits that these have over the just flat ability strengths is that these are essentially serration. You pretty much just want the ability strength, maybe for certain abilities damage-wise, like Roar perhaps? It still wouldn't anymore, but it's mostly for breakpoints. So for some frames, it's like I need to get to 200% to full strip them, or I need to get to X% to full strip them. Those are the main situations now where you would use ability strength, whereas before it was just objectively like, yeah, I want to use the ability strength. Maybe it might still be objective for some frames such as Wisp, but in general, I don't think that is any longer the case because, again, this is a final damage multiplier. It's multiplying your final power strength by 10% as opposed to just adding a flat 10%, kind of like serration versus crit damage or what have you, or serration versus a Bane, right? Easy choice, go with the Bane. That's how I look at these, essentially a Bane. Now, typically when you add a red Archon Shard, just one in ability strength, you don't really notice it in playing. But the 15, I actually really noticed this, and it's completely anecdotal and totally subject to many different variables, but I've been doing like 60% of my team's damage, 49%, 50%. Like, I've been doing so much of my team's damage with this like not DPS frame, in my opinion. I think he's like a support tank. So you really notice it when you put these shards on, these ability damage shards. It's not like the reds where, you might notice it if you add 3 of the 15% on at one time, but when you just add 1 of the 10%, you're like, I don't really notice it that much, but you will notice these ones. So I can't recommend enough, these specific status shards are really incredible, and these, if you're trying to min-max your character in terms of damage, 1000% at least have one of these on your character for like literally all of your characters, because you can use a radiation status weapon or you can use an electricity weapon like the Amprex, and that will essentially make your damage dealing primary weapon also priming because of the ability damage bonus. So this is one of the most cracked things I think in the update that we're starting with right up front, but believe me, the very last one we'll be talking about is the one that I think is going to blow your mind, and I'll show some test room footage of it. But moving on to the second one, this is another crazy one for Gyron specifically. I mean, both of these two are for Gyre. 1000%, I would recommend you have both of these on Gyre over, say, Power Strength. So gain 30% electricity damage, and then gain an additional 10% per Crimson, Azure, or Violet Archon Shards. The Crimson is the red, the Azure is the blue, and then the Violet is, well, this one. So these are what you're already going to have on her. So in my particular build, I have 2 blue shards for energy on her, as I don't want to put a flow on her. She already has that covered, so this fills up the slot. So these count towards it, and then I have of course, the ability damage from the first one on here. So you just need one of these to get the maximum benefit of it. I do not know if they stack together. Say you put two of them on each other because it is part of the mentioned thing. I don't know if you could double the effects of it and get say like 50% or whatever. But having one of these on your Geyer and using like the Amprex is insane. Really, really, really massive damage increase, almost specifically for Geyer. But you could literally use this on anyone who uses the Amprex, which, oh baby, if we get the Incarnate Amprex, I want it so bad. And then now the gain 25% melee critical damage when max energy is over 500. Essentially, you just need primed flow on any frame, and you can get that. Valkyr, for example, now we have a massive, massive buff to Valkyr players who do a duration-based build. I don't, so it's not a massive buff to mine, but see 25% melee critical damage, whereas this one is just melee critical damage 25% as well. The difference is, well, this is 50% if you can get over the 500. So this is a huge, this is essentially like double damage for a lot of melee frames, such as Sevagoth, Valkyr, potentially, I'm not entirely sure, but Ashe, like any frame who uses a melee, which especially because melees just got buffed because the Tennokai stuff, this is absolutely massive DPS increase. Now this is the one that a lot of players that from what I've seen are conflicted on the most. They don't see how it's worth the value, and I didn't initially either when I first saw it. Health pickups gain 20% energy pickups give 20% health. A lot of people were theorizing that you could combine a bunch of these and replace Equilibrium. Unfortunately, that's not the case. I wouldn't use it to replace Equilibrium. I would throw like one or two in your build at tops. As you can see, I have one in my build currently right now. So you're probably trying to ask yourself, like, it takes 2 shards to make that, right? So what is the benefit over having another Equilibrium, which you probably already have equipped, on top of 50% energy orb effectiveness? Especially if this is Tau, it's 75% energy orb effectiveness versus this would become 30%. So it's a higher number. Why would you use this over the Tau yellow shard for energy orb effectiveness? And the answer is very simple. Even though on paper it looks like it's objectively used the yellow shard, it's not. And that is because you get way more health orbs. Just straight up, you get way more health orbs than you do of energy orbs. And you can also use Synth Deconstruct on your pet, which has a 25% chance for for enemies affected by your pet to drop additional health orbs. So it may seem initially that the 75% effectiveness on a Tau yellow shard would be much better, but in my practice and my testing with taking it on, I've tested both the Tau version of this on my Valkyr and this version, and it's noticeable, my guy. I didn't think it would be, but these shards are very huge. Slap one on and it pretty much solves like all of my energy problems on this frame. And I didn't really have much energy problems on Corvex, but now I have none, which is really cool. And you don't typically think one shard is going to make a drastic difference like that, but it did in my opinion. So highly would recommend throwing one of those on your build. But that's it for the purple ones. Now we're going to talk about the Topaz. So this one's kind of weird. I feel like this is going to get more cracked in the future, but I don't think we're quite there yet for its initial usability. So recover 1 health per enemy killed with a blast damage. That's killed with the blast damage. Max 300 health. It does stack. And then we also have regenerate 5 shields when you inflict an enemy with blast status. So this isn't saying if it's a weapon or it's an ability, so it's both. So to make use of this, if your pet does blast damage, you could get the benefit of this. If your weapon does blast damage, you can get the benefit of this. So I don't know many frames off the top of my head that do blast damage. I believe Nova does. So this could be a buff to tank Novas, although like I don't see too many tank Novas or Nova players in general, so I don't know what use that's going to do. But in particular, these 2 shards, I have to back out of this menu, and I have to show you the Strun, because this is pretty much tailor-made for Strun players. It'll also work on some other weapons, which I will show you, and then we'll go back. So let's go to the Strun. The Strun is a terrific candidate for both of those Archon Shards to proc, because at base, the explosion has Blast. At base has Blast. And you see 182 status right there at base. You can crank that fucker up, my guy. 722% whatever status chance. Holy shit. And then big boy blast. So you can really, really, really make use of both of those Archon Shards on literally any frame. So now, if say you're Strun main, or what other weapons do people like that are popular that do blast damage? Say you're a Kuvazar main, which I know you are. The Zar Uprising is at hand. So a lot of weapons have blast as a secondary like effect that you don't ever notice and you never typically want. But now a lot of you mains for specific weapons, if you want to make your frame a weapon platform specifically for that weapon, you have those options. Kind of similar to how I was saying you could put on the ability damage shards and just use a weapon that does that particular damage. It's kind of the same scenario where now you could have shield and health regen from your weapon just by virtue of it hitting people, which I think that those shards are the most potentially cracked shards, these blast status ones, but at the moment now nobody likes them. On all the sources I've seen, people think that these are generally the weakest, but I have a feeling it's going to take one YouTube creator a video specifically on like, I have insane shield regeneration, I shoot once and I get all my overshield. It's going to take one of those and people are going to understand, so mark my words right now. And then we're going to go on to the next one because that's about all I have to say on those. Increases secondary critical chance by 1%. 1% every time you kill an enemy affected by heat damage. So you could be using Ember, and it's applying heat to everyone. You could be using Chroma, a heat inherit build. You could be using Inaros with a heat stat stick to provide his tornado heat damage to everyone. Or you could be using the Nucor and the Cycron and Cascadia Flare, or the Spyrix and Cascadia Flare, and do insane damage. So for frames like this is going to be an easily, like, you have to have one of these on your rally. You have to have these if you're a secondary main. I know a lot of players are like me where we try builds where we want to do the most damage with our secondary weapon and have our primaries as a primer, and say use like a stat stick as our primer. Just something to spread the priming you get with primers, so I don't know why I'm explaining it. But so this is for us secondary mains. It's potentially a very, very big damage increase. To my understanding, I deleted the. I don't have the footage of it, but I did test before I put it on him. I put one on my Ureli, and then I forgot that I wanted to. I thought this was just. I was misunderstanding, so I wasted a lot of bile moving all this shit around. But to my understanding, it's basically like adding a sacrificial steel. It's not flat. It's just, so if your weapon has 5% critical chance, it's not going to do much. But if you're using a weapon that does have it and you're using your rally, it could really actually make stuff. It could be like Harrow, where you're using something that has 1% crit and now it has a lot by virtue of you're just stacking on insane amounts of flat crit and what have you. So that's only for like secondary mains, and this is, again, we're seeing a pattern here of this is usable on every frame. It's awesome that you can use. A lot of people were saying that these are for specific frames only. It's not. These are for weapon platforms. A lot of frames are weapon platforms, and these are perfect for that. The ability damage, again, we already talked about these. I noticed a big buff when I put it on my guy. But real quick, going back to the blast, because I forgot to mention that if Limbo is to ever get a buff where he applies status damage, that is going to make his 4 and all his other abilities, but most particularly his 4 because it covers the most ground, regenerate 5 shields every time you cast it. So if Limbo ever gets a buff, it's going to completely break the shard and make Limbo an insane like tank god. So that's potentially future, but that's like probably not going to happen. And then we have we're a similar thing here where this could be used on anyone who's using a toxin status weapon. Toxin status effects deal 30% more damage. So if you have any frame that's dealing a toxic status, if you have any weapon that's dealing a toxic status, it's going to potentially be a big damage buff to that. So if you're like specifically building one frame specifically to kill Corpus, which I have seen people make specific, like this frame is for Grenier, this frame is for Corpus. It could be really big. You could also potentially put this on like Mesa and have like a lot more pistol damage. I don't know if that's better than the red for secondary critical chance or the other for critical chance, but potentially, I'm not too sure. I think that the status effect, the toxin ones are the weakest. People were saying the blast. I really think specifically the second one here we're talking about now, health each, you gain 2 health each time enemies are damaged by toxin status effect. I think this is the most lackluster one. You could get a lot of, if you're spreading a lot of status, if a toxin status, you could be getting a lot of health constantly, but it remains to be seen. I haven't tested this one specifically, so I don't really know too much about it. I personally, I do enjoy the health regenerated per second because it's just very comfy. This could potentially be way better than that, but it really just depends on your output of toxin status. And I think that this is very niche. This might be on like a health tank Necros, which I have a video on. This would probably work perfectly with that. And with, I forget if it's the toxin daggers or the toxin incarnate pistols that have a option to heal from your toxin procs. So this could additionally add to that and give you a lot more HP per toxin procs, but I don't know how I feel about that. And now, as I mentioned at the very beginning, we're going to talk about, this is the craziest part that I've saved for last. Increases max stacks of corrosion status effect by 2. So I wouldn't waste your Tau on this, because if you put your Tau on this, it will bring you to, I think it's 96 or 98% of their armor stripped. So I'm not a master of the math on this, so I could be incorrect about the math on this, but I am correct about the facts. If you have 2 of these shards on any of your frames, it's going to be able to full strip enemies of their armor. Full stop. You can full strip with any frame now. Alright? Any frame can now full strip, which is kind of insane. Kind of very insane. If you were to use a Tau, you would still need a second one. The Tau would give you 3 stacks. You need 4 to full strip. Alright? So I wouldn't use the Tau on this, as you're going to need to anyway, but hey, maybe 15 stacks. The benefit you would get from having 15 stacks is this. The corrosive status effect does decay, so when you're not at the 14% reduction of their armor, it's not going to full strip them. However, a lot of enemies are specifically weak to corrosive, so even if they aren't full stripped, you are still doing the extra damage. See, a lot of enemies, it's their armor that's weak to the extra damage. So even not full stripping them, you're doing more damage because they have armor. So even just being close to that breakpoint is a massive DPS increase. Now, in this particular build, I'm going to show you in the test room in just a second, but I want you to take note that this is corrosive. A corrosive status effect Boar incarnate build, alright? And I want you to pay attention to those corrosive shards. We also have a corrosive status effect compressor here with another crazy ribbon. So I want you to pay attention to that. And then we also have a corrosive based, it's from mods, but corrosive melee weapon, so that our tornadoes that's using elemental sandstorm will apply corrosive. Now again, thank you very much for watching this far into the video. I'm now going to teleport to the testing room so I can show you just how insanely powerful this is. And this is again something that you could throw this on literally any frame. What I like about these new shards is that they're very versatile. You could throw it on any frame and it takes into account, like say you're an Amprex main who wants to use the Amprex on literally fucking everyone. Well, now you're going to get benefited from doing that because of 2 shards that benefit it, not just 1. So this is very much benefiting people who, for example, want to main in a specific element or a specific area. So this is not only going to allow us to increase our min-maxing capabilities, it will also allow for us to increase our diversity, which is, it's very rare for buffs and power creep that allow for more diversity, as opposed to like, all right, well, the power crept up. Now these frames are much better and these frames are much weaker. A lot of these affect everyone. So what I'm going to show you here, all right, is first I'm going to start with what's least impressive first. So I'm going to show you my typical combination. I'm going to use my 4. The 4 does corrosive damage. It does not do corrosive status effects, so you see they still have their shields, right? And now I'm going to use my tornado. My tornado is mostly modded for corrosive. It could be better, but look at that. We have full strip on Inaros. Now, my pet is also modded for corrosive, and it has 100% status duration. So as long as my pet is shooting them, which I will have multiple of my pets because I'm using, I think it's Manifest Bond, that when I cast stuff, it has a chance to spawn them, that will increase their ability to leave the status on them, because as you can see, it kind of decays quickly, and then as it decays, their shields go up. But we also have the boar. Now this is what's even more impressive. Look, I'm full stripping them. Now these are Drakkar Manic Bombards. These are some of the toughest enemies in the entire game. These are basically like hour-long Steel Path Orkin or Corrupteds. These are very, very tough. These are like the Grineer Super Soldiers. So you're going to be able to full strip with any weapon you want that does status damage that isn't the Latron. That was pretty much special to the Latron and not too much else. I think the Miter maybe, the one or two other Incarnans. But now, Lord Jesus, it's really impressive. A lot of people think that the boar is garbage too. So that's why I think this is a good metric, is it's spreading the status fast, quick, and like, oh lord, bro, this is a massive power creep. So a lot of people were sleeping and saying that the Archon Shards that are green are garbage, and it's because of a misunderstanding. A lot of people thought that they couldn't get you to full strip, and that is because those stacks, the corrosive stacks are like flat, it's giving it to you. But people, from what I was seeing, were testing it with corrosive projection. This will never get you to 100%, even if you're at like, say you're at like 99% or 98%, we'll say. This won't get you to 100% because it's a percentage. It's like serration, how we were talking about the difference between the math. It's basically like a serration. It's not going to affect it as much. So that was getting a lot of people confused. They're testing it with this. They're like, oh, I won't full strip. It's stupid. But if you have the 2 shards, you need 4 stacks. So even if you have a Tau, the Tau Farch brings it to 3. You would still need another one. Hence, I don't think it's worth wasting 2 Shouds. 2 Taus, as you need 2 Taus to create 1 Tau. That was the most important thing I wanted to show you, absolutely. And my final, this is kind of a throwaway piece of information. So now when we're talking about how many shards we have on your character, a lot of people are like, oh, I have 5 Tau. Now, for this particular build, I would say I have 6 Tau shards, because this energy pickup is 2 Tau shards to make this. So if you had these combined shards on all 5 slots, you would say I have 10 Tau forged Archon shards on my frame. So that is the new hyper min-maxed, is being able to say, I have 10 Forma, 11 Forma on my frame, 3 of which are Umbra, and then I also have an 8 Forma, 2 Umbral, so 5 Umbrals in total, melee weapon, and then I also have the 10 Tau Archon Shards, which right now I only have 6, but that's going to be the new, I am completely, absolutely maxed out. So if you felt like you learned anything from this, or if there was any incorrect information, I'm mostly wanting to know the incorrect information. If it is noteworthy enough of note, I will pin it in the comments section. But the only way that you can let me know if you learned anything from this or felt it was valuable, insightful, or a complete waste of time and I rambled too much, the only way you can let me know that is to go and drink a lot of water.